Welcome. My name is Melissa Bailey Kirk, and I'm the pastor at Gashland United Methodist Church in the Northland of Kansas City, Missouri. Today is the third in a worship series during which we in my congregation are exploring the characteristics of God's kingdom. A few weeks ago, we remembered our call as followers of Jesus to live in connection with those who are often overlooked. Last week, the KinDom affirmation of relationship was brought to our attention as we read of Jesus's work to restore healthy and life-giving relationship within an individual and among an entire community. Today, we will consider the ways that God's kingdom calls us beyond the boundaries of our comfort zones or preconceived notions in extension to all. During the 8th century BCE, the independence of the southern kingdom of Judah began to crumble. The Assyrian ruler, Tiglath-Pileser III, had mounted a campaign to broaden his power, his rule throughout all of Syria and Palestine, annexing the northern kingdom of Israel and working to overtake the southern kingdom of Judah. The prophet Isaiah lived in the southern kingdom, lived in Judah, a community that knew that the axe was going to fall and could do nothing to stop it. In Isaiah 34, the prophet describes what life looks like for people who have lost all hope. The heavens had disappeared, the land was ruined, streams were poisoned, fields barren. All that remained were ghostly images of scavenging animals and plants that bore no fruit. It was a dark picture of despair, which was the picture carried in the heart of Judah. Imagine just for a moment what it might be like to live life waiting for the axe to fall. We don't have to stretch our imaginations too much. Whatever our political alliance, we know that the outcome of this year's presidential election will feel like an axe falling for some of us. Whatever our age, we know that the presence and apparent rise in cases of COVID-19, we know that that does feel like a multitude of axes suspended over our heads, axes that we might label finances, food and shelter security, physical and emotional health, church health, school systems, social isolation, just to name a few. And whatever our thoughts about the need for ongoing conversation, learning, and reform related to race in our country, anti-racism protests must feel like a precariously positioned axe for some. And we know that there's not a massive army moving into the territory we habitate as there was for the Judah dwellers. However, we are in many ways held captive by the pandemic that has spread across the planet, unable to freely choose how we work, how we worship, how we learn, how we move, how we live. We're living in days characterized by combative, divisive speech, our own concerns about being verbally attacked or marginalized, limiting our ability to apply rational thought to decision making or to be in conversations with a rational posture. Of course, we're not 8th century BCE Judah, but we do know what it's like to live with an axe or two or three hanging over our heads. We do know what it's like when hopelessness creeps in, when we become unable to imagine that things will ever change for the better. Our vision of the heavens obstructed by our isolation, COVID fatigue, election worries, anger about ongoing injustices, and fear that this is all there is, that this is all there will ever be. Isaiah speaks to us today. Chapter 34, describing the ways that unrelenting communal fear and anxiety can give rise to despair, changing the way that we see the world and our place in it. And then in the next chapter, Isaiah pivots sharply as only a prophet can, painting a different picture, not separated from the gloom of Isaiah 34, but rising up out of that gloom. Listen now for a word from God, Isaiah chapter 35, beginning with verse 4. Say to the anxious heart, be strong, fear not, behold your God. Requital is coming, the recompense of God. God's self is coming to give you triumph. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. The lame shall leap like deer, and the tongue of the mute shall shout out loud. For waters shall burst forth in the desert, streams in the wilderness. Torrid earth shall become a pool, parched land, fountains of water. The home of jackals, now a pasture. The abode of ostriches, now reeds and rushes. This passage opens with the command to speak to the anxious of heart. A more literal translation of that from the Hebrew would be to speak to the ones whose hearts are racing. Anybody's hearts racing out there? I know that my heart races. Anytime anyone asks me when we're going to return to in-person worship, when I watch the Kansas City, Missouri metro area numbers of COVID positivity rates increase and decrease and increase and decrease, when I watch election campaign ads or listen to debates, when I try to discern my next step in conversation about racial injustice, my heart races. My heart races when I see images of people behaving without concern for themselves or others, when I hear of businesses closing. Every time I hear what working in or attending or having a child in school is like these days, my heart races. When I work with others in my church to stabilize the finances of our church, when I can't visit people in the hospital, when funeral services cannot welcome any and all to celebrate a dear life. When my heart races, when your heart races, a hormonal response is triggered. Our muscles are stimulated, blood flow increases, our metabolism accelerates, and our vision kind of narrows in. Our bodies are getting us ready to fight, to run away, or to freeze. And all of this is a gift from God, a way that we are created, a way to energize our bodies and minds to protect ourselves and others in situations of acute and real danger. For instance, I hear the rattle of a snake, my heart races, and I freeze. I see a child about to fall off of a swing set or the ladder to a slide, my heart races and I run to him. I hear a dog snap at my grandniece, and I move my body to step in between her and the threat, ready to fight. Now, this stress response was never intended to be triggered every single day, but only to be triggered in those situations when we or another are actually in danger of real damage, of even losing our lives. Our body, mind, spirit, our wholeness, we are not designed to handle daily surges of stress hormones or extended periods of racing hearts, which is what is happening with many of us now. We are constantly bombarded with stressors, our fears triggered consistently. And without a healthy range of options for dealing with stress, we're thrown into thoughtlessly reacting by fighting or running away or being paralyzed. Maybe we engage in gossip or withdraw from our small group, our families or friends. That's a reaction to stress rather than a response. Maybe we quit coming to church or meeting with people who have been life-giving to us. Maybe we begin to criticize the choices of others. Maybe we cut off our giving to the church or stop returning phone calls or responding to emails, cutting ourselves off as well. Maybe we forget that we are kin, sisters and brothers in God's kingdom, called to extend grace to all, even those with whom we disagree, even those who have disappointed us, even those who make different choices. I'm reminded of a bit of wisdom from Proverbs. A friend loves at all times. A lot of us have perhaps heard that before, but I don't remember ever reading the second portion of that proverb. A friend loves at all times, and kinsfolk are born to share adversity. Kinsfolk are born to share adversity, even when our hearts are racing and we want to do nothing more than fight or just run away or tuck in and freeze. All of these verses from Isaiah 35 are for us, we of the racing hearts. We do not have to be driven to unhealthy reactivity by the beating of our hearts. We can choose differently, says Isaiah. Be strong, fear not. Behold your God. God is coming. And the picture changes when we're able to see that God is involved, doesn't it? Eyes and ears and throats that have been shut in fearful anticipation at the axe's drop are open. Those who have been crippled by fear will dance. Barren land will give birth, and dried streams will overflow with water. This kind of gets my heart racing right here, not in fear, but in hope, not in preparation for the response to a threat, but in anticipation of restoration and healing. The reminder that God is always, even when things look dark and axes look shiny, God is always extending beyond those things that increase our fear and anxiety. God is always working to make things right. And God calls us to extend ourselves beyond our fears and anxiety and join God in that work. When we are frozen, the grace of God unbinds us. We can focus on what is needed right now, right here, in order to bring hope. This next week, some people in the church I serve are preparing a dinner for the teachers and staff at our elementary school partner, because those teachers and staff are going to be at school from early in the morning until late at night, all day, conducting parent-teacher conferences. They will not have a break to leave for dinner. That's something that we can do right here, right now, to bring hope to people who are doing things that they never thought they'd have to do or need to do in order to serve the children and the families in our neighborhoods. When we want to run away, the grace of God plants our feet right where God needs us. Friends, there is going to be a presidential election next month, whether we like it or not. And we don't need to throw up our hands in hopelessness. We can, by the grace of God, learn what we need to learn and do what we need to do in order to vote and to vote safely. When our hackles rise and we want to fight, the grace of God soothes us. Beneath the often overpowering surge of emotions during conversations about race, the truth, the historical fact of race is one of slavery and injustice in our country. So it is going to be discussed. It will be protested, whether we like it or not. We don't need to throw verbal or physical punches. We can, by the grace of God, learn what we need to learn and do what we need to do in order to live as members of God's kingdom, where there is equity and justice for all. However things may look, God is busy working in us and working through us to bring about God's kingdom. God's kingdom is a reality that extends beyond whatever appears to be a threat, extends beyond even that which is an actual threat. When we feel our hearts racing in fear, we can practice prayerful curiosity. Where is God in this? I'm not suggesting that this is easy. To pause with our racing hearts, to slow down when our bodies are telling us to speed up. It's not easy, but it is necessary if we are going to live as kin who are born to share all of life together. When our hearts race and we feel our muscles clench, our vision narrow, we can take one or two for 3 deep breaths and ask, where is God at work here? As we allow ourselves to see the world, not as a place of hopeless despair, but as a place where God is at work, where God's grace is extending through and beyond that which frightens us, our eyes are opened. And we can see signs of life and restoration. Our ears are unstopped, and we can hear songs of healing and justice. Then, perhaps, our heart's still racing, but maybe not so much from fear, but in hope. We can continue with our deep breathing and ask, where does God want me to be in this? Boldly or tentatively, we can begin to imagine ourselves participating with God in the divine work of making things right. Our own hands, our own hearts extending through and beyond that which had us running, fighting, frozen. Our bodies now moving in concert with God's leaping dance of reconciliation and peace. Our mouths open to join God's steadfast song of compassion and justice for all. May you hear the grace of God speaking into your own fears and anxieties. May you welcome the presence of Jesus Christ as you breathe slowly and deeply. And may you know the Spirit's power birthing in you hope and peace and dance.